Lauri Markkanen is one of the most interesting potential trade candidates in the entire NBA. As of this recording, the Jazz are actually playing pretty well, but I don't anticipate that to be the case for the entirety of the season. And Markkanen is a player that they have definitely explored trading in the past, even going back to prior off seasons in which he was eligible for an extension. They were shopping him to Golden State, a variety of teams. Then he signed the extension, then he stayed, and now Markkanen's playing really well, and that was always step one for Utah in terms of trading Lauri Markkanen, because even though everybody knows he's good, he hasn't played a ton over the last handful of seasons, specifically last year, partially because of injury, partially because the Jazz kind of faked that he had an injury because they were trying to tank, and he needed to bring his value back up. Well, now he has absolutely done that. Lauri Markkanen is playing out of his mind, and it reopens up the possibility of the Jazz, who clearly have a long-term outlook on their team, making a move and trading him. So we're going to talk about where he could possibly go and just the situation in Utah in general. So for Markkanen, I think there are other guys around the league that might come to mind as potential trade options. Obviously, there's a lot of drama going on with someone like Ja Morant, a couple of other guys around the league, but I think in terms of realistic trade targets, someone that is signed long-term, someone that's still relatively young, has a lot of value, would fit in on a variety of teams that might want to make a semi-all-in move this year. I think Markkanen fits perfectly at the center of all of those things. And like I said, there's some momentum here because he's playing really well. A couple of teams to talk about here. The Philadelphia 76ers are a team that have been connected to Markkanen for a while, especially going back to the time of the 2025 NBA draft, where the Sixers had the third overall pick. They, of course, take VJ Edgecombe, who's really good. Don't worry, Sixers fans, I have not put together any kind of trade construction that involves VJ Edgecombe going to Utah. The Sixers, in theory here, would like to maybe add Markkanen as this front court player that can shoot, provide them spacing. Obviously, they've got this really exciting team, and if they could add someone like Markkanen, it fits their timeline well in terms of helping Embiid now, but also helping the young guys, which is why there were a lot of discussions around them potentially being an option in terms of a Markkanen trade at the time of the draft. The problem is, in any construction in which the Sixers are adding Lauri Markkanen, they have to find someone, whether it be Utah or anyone else, to take on Paul George's contract, which you want to talk about someone that hasn't played lately. We were talking earlier about how Markkanen's value needed to be rehabilitated a little bit because he didn't play last year. Paul George's trade value is unbelievably low. He is a negative asset at this point, and from a salary structure standpoint, the Sixers have to trade Paul George. That's why at the time of the draft, one of the things that was being thrown around was Paul George plus the third overall pick that ends up becoming VJ Edgecombe in exchange for Lauri Markkanen. And even that, I speculated at the time, might not have been enough for Utah, even though obviously Edgecombe has looked really good. So in theory, you could put together a trade package of the Paul George contract, a couple of first round picks, and Jared McCain in exchange for Lauri Markkanen. Markkanen is very good. I think Philly would love to have him, but the Paul George piece of this complicates things. And the Sixers are kind of moving towards this window where it makes more sense to prioritize Tyrese Maxey, VJ Edgecombe, Jared McCain, if he's still on the team. And Markkanen, although he's not old by any means, represents a little bit more of a Embiid timeline kind of move, even if you're able to get out of the Paul George thing. And to me, I've talked about this in recent videos with Philly, I think they're probably going to be more so thinking, how do we build around Maxey and how do we build around Edgecombe? And trading away McCain, trading away multiple firsts does not accomplish that. Not to mention, if I'm Utah and I truly want to trade Lauri Markkanen, I think there are probably other places that I can look because I don't want anything to do with that Paul George contract. If I'm going to try and be good over the next handful of seasons, if I'm going to take 2 more years, if I'm Utah, you're going to trade Markkanen, take 2 years to really build this thing up. The number one thing I don't want on my roster is that Paul George contract when it comes to flexibility. So although Philly, from a basketball perspective, if you're not thinking about the future, you're just thinking about the on-court product, does make a lot of sense for Markkanen, I don't think there's actually all that much of a possibility there. Another team that I've seen mentioned is the San Antonio Spurs. The concept of Markkanen plus Wemby in the front court works really well together. The Spurs obviously traded for De'Aaron Fox, but they didn't trade that much for him. I have a scenario here in which De'Aaron Fox is not involved in the trade. Maybe there's something there where you can send Fox elsewhere, go to Utah. He's not currently playing as we're recording this video, so trying to trade him is a little bit odd. And just like with Philly, the Spurs don't want to give up the guy that just drafted, in this case it's Dylan Harper, in exchange for Lauri Markkanen. But again, like Philly, From a basketball perspective, there's a lot of things to like here. San Antonio might be better than most people thought this year. They have an opportunity here to make a not all-in move, but something that improves their chances of being competitive in the West this year. And they have some salaries they can put together here to match Markkanen's $45-ish million contract. And just like with a team like Houston, a couple of other teams around the league, they have a bunch of picks that they can trade as well without even using any of their own picks. So the Spurs are definitely a realistic Markkanen trade option. In this scenario, it's Keldon Johnson, Kelly Olynyk, Jeremy Sohan, and a couple of first-round picks in exchange for Markkanen. The question for San Antonio is Markkanen the guy you want to use some of these assets for? Because for De'Aaron Fox, they traded the equivalent of basically 2 firsts and some contracts, whereas for Markkanen, it's going to require more. It's going to be another bigger contract on top of having Fox on his big deal. And strictly from a financial perspective, you're kind of establishing that De'Aaron Fox, Lauri Markkanen, and Victor Wembanyama, of course, are your cornerstone players, and I'm unsure if that's the decision San Antonio wants to make right now. Not to mention, if I'm Utah, from a player perspective, no disrespect to someone like Jeremy Sohan or Keldon Johnson, this is not really what I'm looking for in exchange for Markkanen. It's cool to have the extra first, but Utah is not lacking in young guys that they could possibly turn into something as late first-round picks. They have a handful of those guys. Ironically, they need a focal point guy, and obviously Markkanen is that currently, but they'd like someone maybe with a little bit of a higher ceiling. And so I don't think this one works for Utah either, even though just like Philly, it would make sense on the floor for San Antonio. Another team that has been connected to Markkanen for a little while is the Golden State Warriors. Going back to 2 off seasons ago, the 2024 offseason, they were probably the team that was closest to actually getting Lauri Markkanen. Before then, he signed his contract extension, which made him ineligible to be traded for the entirety of the season last year. And the concept at the time was Andrew Wiggins, a couple of other things. That stuff got moved to Miami in exchange for Jimmy Butler. And now that they have done that, it gets pretty difficult to trade for Lauri Markkanen. It's made a little bit easier by the fact that they now have Jonathan Kuminga under contract, and once we get closer to the deadline, he would be eligible to be traded, makes about $22 million. Without that, this trade would be literally impossible. With that, you can kind of piece it together. I don't know why the trade machine didn't have Jonathan Kuminga's new number, by the way, but just imagine that it's here. You can kind of piece together Kuminga, Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, maybe some picks, but one, I don't think Utah is super interested in that, even if they really, really like Jonathan Kuminga, which I'm not sure if they do. And 2, you're kind of gutting a lot of your rotation if you're Golden State. Kuminga's been good, Moody's been good, Hield's a good shooter, and you don't really have a bunch of future picks that are going to super interest Utah in this scenario. And so it's kind of similar to what we've already talked about in the past with Golden State, where their move was the Jimmy Butler trade. And so they kind of used all of those pieces to go and get him. And now, especially from a salary perspective and also from an asset perspective, they just don't have the pieces to bring in someone like Lauri Markkanen realistically. If they were just the only suitor and Utah was like, yeah, sure, we just want to get rid of him. But clearly, that's not the scenario we're in. So I think it's unrealistic to expect Golden State to trade for him. Which brings me to a team that I do actually think is realistic, and that is the Detroit Pistons. The Pistons have been linked to Markkanen for a while as well because they need spacing, they need a little bit more front court scoring, and the combination of him with Cade, Nassar Thompson, and Jalen Duren mixes really well. A lot of the defense stuff to kind of cover up some of Markkanen's issues at times on defense, not all the time, but at times, and obviously his spacing really elevates what they do, especially given how they've struggled a little bit spacing-wise in the absence of someone like Malik Beasley this year. And it's very easy to put together the contracts, or at least the large bulk of the contracts for Markkanen's contract number, because you have Tobias Harris there. You have Tobias Harris, you have some picks, and you can kind of bridge the gap between Markkanen's $45 million or whatever it is and Tobias Harris's 20-something million. And one of the ways you can do that is by adding someone in like Jaden Ivey, which is the trade construction I have on screen here. That I'm unsure about because I don't know if Utah actually wants him. Obviously, he's been hurt. Is Detroit willing to keep him? They've been without Jaden Ivey for like a year at this point. They were good last year. They've been pretty good to begin this year. And I think they could definitely look at that scenario and say, we're good just moving on from him and using whatever potential he has as an asset. Whereas for Utah, 1, you're worried about the injuries. 2, he doesn't have an extension, so you're going to have to deal with that yourselves. It's kind of creating a problem for you, even though in comparison to the situation like with Philly earlier, they would have to take on the Paul George contract in that scenario. In this scenario, you're getting quote unquote out of the Lauri Markkanen money pretty immediately because Tobias Harris isn't expiring. And as I mentioned, Jaden Ivey would need a new contract at the end of the year. My question here is twofold. 1, does Detroit view this as enough of a move to get them to where they want to go with some internal improvement for their young guys? Or are they not a Lauri Markkanen away from competing at the top of what is definitely a weak Eastern Conference, but still the top couple of teams in the conference are still very good? Detroit might not see that much value in that. And the other part of it is, for Utah, as we've talked about with all these other trades, is this enough to make you actually move off of Markkanen? And that is the thing that I keep coming back to for the Jazz. If you look at their situation and you're assuming that at some point during the year they're going to be 10, 15 games under 500, they're going to start tanking, because that's what's happened in Utah the last couple of years. If you're looking at that situation, you're thinking, okay, it doesn't really make sense to pay Lauri Markkanen $45 million a year when the team isn't good, when he doesn't have any other co-stars. And Markkanen, I'm sure at some point would like to play in a playoff series. To this point in his career, he has not done that. So of course it makes sense for the two sides to move on from each other. However, he's playing so well and is such an asset to Utah that I think it would be difficult in this cap environment where teams don't necessarily want to be spending as much money on Markkanen as he's owed. In this scenario where a bunch of teams already owe future picks, they don't necessarily have a way to match the salaries and give up enough picks to make it happen. It's gotten to the point where, even though I think Markkanen is a realistic trade candidate in the sense of his talent and his value to these other teams, the more you look at the situation specifically, with the exception of Detroit, I don't know that there are actually a lot of really, really good options for Utah. And if there aren't at least a few good options and you're the team trading player away, you don't really have a way to leverage teams against each other to potentially get better and better value. If you're just bidding against yourself and it's Detroit that's the only team that is really getting close to your asking price, it gets that much more difficult to trade someone of Markkanen's caliber. I think he's really good. I think Utah is in a scenario where it would make sense because I'm not anticipating their good start to the season to continue, but I'm not 100% sure that there's actually a good Lauri Markkanen trade out there.